As always, first we have to establish what the hell are crop circles and what are known ways that they are formed. Well, for one, crop circles genuinely are geometric shapes, circles, squares, triangles, rectangles, octagons, hexagons, trapezoids, all of the mixes of shapes and sizes and different vibrations through 2D spaces, basically made out of corn or wheat fields. And one of the best and reasons as to why someone would want to do that is you can cover a very large area if you're trying to paint a big picture, so to speak. You know, instead of drawing in the sand, you just draw with crops. What are known ways that they're formed? Well, since I'd say the mid 50s, I want to say they really started getting their prominence is really one of two. One, you would have the real ones, which are trying to genuinely tell you a message through geometric pattern. And then there are the fake ones that are trying to mimic that, but they suck and they really don't know what they're doing, and there's physically no way for them to recreate what the real ones are because of the way they actually form them and how they electrically align the plants together so that they don't have any bends, they don't have any weird appendages. But with actual people, they have to roll down the plants and actually cause them to pretty much die, versus the other ones, they don't. As soon as the message is essentially lived out its life, if I understand it, they progressively go back to normal over time. So, interesting thing to think about. So as I said, around what time did they start appearing? Roughly the 50s. And the key differences is I feel as though the messages from the earlier crop circles were more or less trying to paint a picture of understanding consciousness and really, tapping into, seeing these geometric shapes. Now I think they're really starting to push the really deeper concepts, the deeper vibrations, the deeper energy ideas, the deeper geometric shapes that are going to lead you to different avenues. Because the moment you try to put these things into context, you really start to see a pattern going on with the universe, with, nature around you, and what it's trying to tell you, basically. And I would say they're more advanced now to a degree. I would say there are some repeats. I wouldn't say that, they're always going to try and change up the message. I'd say it's a pattern. And I'd also say that, it comes in cycles. Of course, there are, crop circles that they have probably given us to death around the world, and they don't, necessarily feel as though that they need to do that. They just, they're very, very meticulous on what they give us in terms of these crop circles, because they're always different, they're always unique, and they're complex concepts. I mean, if you really boil them down. Junk, do you want to butt in here?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the crop circle phenomena, just as he said, we're working our way in cycles. So it's almost like every single time there's a new resurgence in consciousness, something happens. And roughly around the early 90s, I believe, there was just like a spur of new crop circles all over the world, like 500 plus. And so you kind of see this and you wonder, what is it? Why is this thing happening? Is there the difference between the fakes, the reals, the authentic ones versus the ones that are nothing more than just, a fast way to fame. And we'll dive into that. But what I found interesting is that the consolidation of crop circles is more so in the European region, specifically Wiltshire, which we can dive into. But for me, just kind of looking at the entire phenomena itself, I realized that it is very impactful because, as Scoop said, you can cover large distances, and they usually take up different kind of vegetation. For example, if you're in America, chances are they're going to be covering grass fields or wheat. And then if you're in Europe, they're going to be doing barley fields. So these are large acreage, like land spaces for a message to be told. And I think it's really interesting that everything that happens comes with a different reason, and it gathers the consciousness of those in the surrounding communities. There was this idea that some people wanted to replicate these crop circles. They would go about and flatten them with their feet or with, tractors or, whatever tools they had. Yeah. Whatever they did, there was a clear difference because every time they looked at the surrounding area, the plant life or the vegetation was still intact. It was still thriving, just bent to a certain degree. And so this means like it allowed the stalk to be bent, I think up to 90 degrees without breaking or killing the plant, which is insane if you think about it. And then the precision of the node bombardment was like a single row of cells. So it's so precise that no man can really replicate it. And that's why when we start to look at the different photos, there's going to be a resonance factor of how you feel when you view them, because they each have their own energy. And chances are when you're looking at a more analogous form of the crop circle, you're going to feel almost a vibration of love emanating from that, as opposed to just seeing a pretty design or an artistic rendition of a crop circle.
Absolutely. So as Junk just discussed, we basically went over the next part, which is how do they get made, different rollers, using tractors, basically manipulating in the worst possible way that they can to try to mimic, what people have taken images of while seeing them in the sky. Not while they were in the sky, not the crop circles in the sky. And they would just try their best to replicate it. Most of the time, it would suck. It wouldn't look good. Junk, do you have any examples of a crappy man-made crop circle?
Yeah, I sent you the infographics if you want to just pull those up.
Okay. Where were...
No, you just clicked it. Yep. So these are more or less the cheesy version. Wait, what are we looking at?
No.
Yeah.
Wait. Are these?
Yeah,
there we go. There we go. Okay.
So one way you can decipher it is that it's a very specific image, because when we look at the symbology, just as Scoop said earlier, we're looking more into geometry. So looking at more symbolistic kind of like imagery as far as like faces and things like this go, for the most part, is faked, just because people want a reaction. So they start to create literal art out there, and it's very clear that if we're in communication with benevolent extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings, chances are they're not going to just want to finger paint. They're going to want to make something, they want to make a profound statement. So this is kind of the conceptualization of the human mind, just kind of creating what we see. But there is a clear and stark difference that between real crop circles, you're going to see more geometrical principles rather than picturesque imagery.
110%. And one of the big things that you have to notice is that, yeah, they might look really good in terms of their edging and how it can look from the distance, But if you look at the middle one, it's a very clear example of just how reckless this stuff is and how just a mess it really can become, because that doesn't look right. That looks so half-assed, and like they're trying to make a face out of that. Not even an extraterrestrial face, just like a face, and it just looks bad. And then you look at this, or no, hold on. And you look at this, and you see, holy crap, even, they might be negative because it's showing you negative symbolism in terms of, you have the Masonic symbol, you have the trident symbol, and what is that in the middle? Is that literally like
yeah, it's a great, but I think what you're trying to go with it is that it's a precision factor. There's human error versus almost like an imprint mold that's created. Yeah. And we'll get into that, but that's how you just look at the edges and you realize, okay, what's sloppy, what's been done in the night, maybe with flashlights, maybe with candles, etc. And then versus this, which is just almost like a little too perfect, so.
And even these, like these are beyond perfect. Or you have the flower of life, you have the Fibonacci sequence, and the Metatron's cube, and we have tetrahedrons all the time. We have, physical vibrations of sound all the time. It's really crazy how often, real crop circles are trying to give out the true vibrational message of the universe. It's fantastic.
I want to double on what Xenox is saying, because basically upon the study of the actual plants, the seeds were found exposed to electron ion impulses. So when we're talking about an instantaneous kind of print or an etching of the environment, it would happen almost in a blink of an eye. And then you think about the technology that has this. It's like, and what's really interesting too, and this is a little known fact about crop circles, and not many people know, is that when these crop circles are made, they actually increase the yield of the plant life or the crops that are being formed on it. So it's almost like a boost. It's an energized impulse, as we heard. And it's so powerful because it has an adaptability to overcome environmental stress. It's like you can bend these crops a 90-degree angle, and they'll still grow in, complete abundance. And that's how you know that there was no foul play. Like the intention of whoever was delivering the message was pure, because they decided not to distort the plant life or kill life to deliver the message, but actually allow it to flourish. So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And yeah, it does happen that quickly. So that's why they get away with it. That's why people wake up overnight and they're like, that wasn't there in the morning, or I just checked the field 2 hours ago and it's there. That's how these things happen.
Yeah, hearing that description of, I'm seeing that in my mind and kind of watching both instances happen as you're describing them, Xenox. And the way I see the second one with the orb coming down, I'm thinking of something like bluish, and it's got like a red, not a red, but like a light coming from it. And you just kind of see it 3D print in a way, the etching in the ground, and kind of just map itself out, kind of like how it was programmed to do it. I don't know. It's just kind of fascinating the way you think about it. And the light thing, yeah, the light thing is, the big flash of light. That's fascinating to me. Oh, just quickly throw that in there. So what are we looking at here, Junk?
It was the orbs that Xenox was mentioning. Somebody happened to get a picture of it.
Oh, okay. No. So going into, so what is the main message through geometry are they trying to tell us? So personally, and everybody else can give their opinion on this one. I would say the message is constantly changing, and there's always a theme to go by in that specific time frame. So as I understand it, I would say the extraterrestrials, the UFOs, whoever is spearheading the operation on giving us these progressively more intense crop circles, I feel as though that I wouldn't want to say it's a subtle way to wake up the consciousness. I would feel as though that it's a kind of, it's its own school, really. I mean, if you go back and you really think about it, a lot of the early crop circles were, geometric shapes of our, 7 chakras and the mandalas, and really, understanding that and seeing that and, understanding where that stuff comes from and what does it mean. And a lot of the main messages is you are very much beyond this earth, and there's a lot more out there than what your government is telling you. Anybody else want to hop on that?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, can you guys?
Oh no, you go for it.
Oh, sure. No, I was just gonna say I find it fascinating that a lot of the images are geometric, that they're mathematical. That really, at every turn of the awakening, especially as you get further deep in the rabbit hole, we seem to hit this mathematical construct of reality. And then we see it projected in the images that these extraterrestrials are potentially showing us, and I do believe that these patterns are incredibly intricate. I can't imagine the level of technology that it would take to create something like that in an instant. I mean, we're talking about huge, vast pieces of land. It may look like an image to us, but like we're talking huge scale, and the fact that they're choosing to show geometric things, mathematical things, I think it's all patterns that most likely hit something in each of our subconscious, something that activates something. I mean, at the end of the day, they know how the universe works, so they're choosing what to project, and this is what they're choosing, and I think it's very important then.
Chunk, do you want to go?
Yeah, well, just to kind of double on everything you guys said, it really does circumvent the idea or the principles of consciousness. So, you mentioned the chakra system, different themes of transcendence or ascendance, star systems. Let me think. Mathematical constants, sacred numbers, sacred geometry, beauty, symmetry, music, frequency, spiritual themes, also science with energy, sonoluminescence, vapor cavitation, light, sound, etc. So it's basically everything that they want to do is compact a very large theme into a single design so that we can further integrate that through study. It's kind of like with mandalas. That's exactly the principle. They want you to dive deep and interpret it within. And I think they also, and we're talking about the benevolent ones, of course, they really want us to figure this out for ourselves. There's still a level of free will that is an act that they can't necessarily trip, because they realize that if they were just to simply write it in the grain with letters and words, it would lose its sacredness. They can maintain a level of secrecy by putting forth a very powerful symbol in place of paragraphs and paragraphs of explanation. So yeah, I think it's personally interpreted, of course, and it's all about resonance. It's what flows with you, and that's how we kind of determine the polarity of what's being portrayed.
110%, my friend. So one of the fascinating things that we have run into in our technological information age is the very interesting magic that happens when you mix 3D software and some of these crop circles. And I'm going to show you right now. Yep, I am in our chat. And I'm going to just throw this up here. Go back to that. Mute it. And then just put it on slower speed. So as you can see, some of these are geometric, very interesting geometric shapes, but look at that. What just was just a spiral of dots are now a torus, showing the flow of energy. Same with that, a different perspective of the torus. The different rings of a torus.
Oh, this is awesome. Look at, whoa.
And how it's showing the different vortexes in the middle of a torus. It's utterly fascinating. Now, I wouldn't necessarily know what this one would be, but that felt more or less like an energy shield to me. That feels like an energy shield, more or less, instead of
Decagon.
It's a what?
Decagon.
Interesting. But yeah, what happens when you mix... Oh, sorry, wrong one. What happens when you mix 3D software and crop circles? It very much paints a very good visual picture as to what the hell they're trying to tell you and what they're trying to show you and the complex things that are behind all of these massive, I don't want to say geological, these massive
Geometric.
yeah, geometric phenomena. So is there any way for us to take the information provided by these crop circles and apply them to our lives? 110%, especially the ones that are talking about your own spiritual energy, the ones that are basically telling you to focus on these specific geometric shapes because they hold a frequency. And the ones that are trying to teach you and map out energy is basically telling you where to find it in the universe, how to see it, how to fully grasp and visualize it. Now, even though that we now have an age to where we can, take those two-dimensional objects and make them 3D, there have been artists for many, 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 many years that have taken those two-dimensionals and have just drawn them 3D and have found it. And, to be honest, as Xander knows, as Junk knows, as Andrea probably knows, and as I know, somebody virtually had to draw that to make that, 3D, video for us to see it progressively go about. Somebody actually had to draw it in a virtual space. So it's fascinating to witness, and it's fascinating to, see us humans interpret it in such different ways that they probably foresaw coming and they chuckle at, and it's like, now you're getting it. Now you're trying to understand it. And you're close, but you're not quite there yet. Junk, do you want to jump on that?
Yeah, essentially, they're planting seeds with seeds. You know,
Literally.
it's fascinating. These always were meant to expand your consciousness in any way, whether it's observation or if it's correlation with figuring it out. Sometimes, for sake of integrating the code, you don't necessarily need to comprehend that you're looking at a torus. It's subconsciously going in. But I do believe that making the connection does help significantly. And for good reason, too. When they start to talk about toroidal fields of energy, chances are they're trying to progress humanity towards that free energy benchmark of becoming sovereign and free. So, yeah.
I want to jump on, and then there's another topic that we're going to dive into after this. It's kind of a secret one because it's very much attached to the crop circle enigma, and that is what I wanted to say. Is Xander brought up this very fascinating point that we all take for granted in the truther community, and it really isn't discussed enough because it's a hard subject, and that is the deeper you go and the farthest aspect of this entire truth movement is that the universe is fundamentally built upon numbers and different equations, and understanding those equations and mapping out the patterns through those equations to fully get a grasp at free energy, laws of the universe, our, infinite, I don't want to say infinite, our increased lifespan. It all boils down to understanding the right code and finding the right numbers that all align in the perfect sequence for it to work, essentially.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, Scoobs, I think that the way I see crop circles, especially if it's benevolent, if I'm putting on that lens to it, I see as like, hey, what can I tell humanity with the 1 second of tech or whatever that I am able to influence the 3D? And they end up showing us sacred geometry a lot of the times, mathematical geometry, and guys, we want to remember that just because it's a physical shape doesn't mean it's not an equation that is entered into a computer or some sort of technological device. Even the flower of life has its mathematical equation. All of this stuff all boils down to math, and that's one of the leading pushes to say that reality is some sort of holographic universe. I mean, for those of us who know what the CIA has been releasing, and we know that this has been confirmed by them, we live in some sort of holographic universe. This is their own words. And the reason why I think that these benevolent beings, hopefully, are showing us these things is because I think the code to our reality is some sort of micro macro. So by them showing us the fundamental mathematic building blocks of our existence, they're showing us the key to the universe. And what more important message than that?
And, you just beautifully introduced the second aspect of the conversation, which is all about sacred geometry and vibration. So, yes, that is a very nice, interesting little segue. I appreciate that. Oh, wow. Holy crap. You gotta see that again. It just forms in the ground. Holy crap. I'm sorry.
It does look 3D printed.
It looks like 3D printing.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like it reverse 3D printing. I was right. But it's still mind-blowing just to see it in action and to see them just twirling around. And I wouldn't, yeah. Now, I wouldn't say it's fluid. Now, if you notice, they're very, very precise in how they're moving around, and they're very like in sync with each other. Yeah, the ones right behind each other, but they're very right next to each other. It's very, very in sync. I don't know. You're right. There is some level of technology, but I don't think it's fluid. I don't think it's fluid. I think they had very specific paths and they're following it. But still fascinating. Very, very fascinating. But
if I can just add one thing,
go for it.
The reason why I do think that they are benevolent, or at least most of them are benevolent, is because I'm not seeing a mass influx of like, upside down pentagrams and really dark imagery that we all know what that looks like. We all know what, the negative or the lower frequency imagery looks like. And we don't see tons of that in crop circles. We see a lot more sacred geometry and benevolent symbols and symbols of life, which is an interesting thing, because you'd think, oh, these grays or UFOs or whatever, they're maybe they don't have our best interest at heart, but what they're graffitiing on our earth is not negative. So it's an interesting thing to note.
No, it was a very good thing to note, honestly. So what is sacred geometry? What is this, thing that we keep spouting about? We have at least said it 10 times, but we've never really stated what, sacred geometry is. And I know I don't really have a guide for this, so I'm fully on winging it, but I think I got this. So sacred geometry is, I would personally say, the fundamental math, the fundamental aspects of the universe. It is the very foundations of how everything in the universe, how our bodies, how, this very computer screen, this microphone, how every single object in the universe is basically formed together through different aspects of sacred geometry and different levels of vibrations that are all holding matter together. Now, what do? Well, they do a boatload of things. And I'm not going to explain that because I can't explain that. Junk, would you like to?
Sorry, you're saying how geometries play into our lives, or?
No, how does sacred geometry work in general? Like, is it on a metaphysical level? Is it on a, sound wave basis? How does...
Well, I will say they are the blueprints of creation. And just as, Xander was saying before, this goes from the micro to macrocosm. And by teaching macrocosmic ideas on a microcosmic level, it allows us to kind of connect the dots and bridge that understanding. So everything is energy. We all know that. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed, so everything has existed, will exist. And the thing that sparks it into motion, when we talk about these kind of toroidal influences, or even the spiral nature of just our atoms, even on a very, very deep level, it's all spurred by love. And I know that sounds a little cheesy, but it really is what it is. I mean, consciousness is based on unification. It's about realizing that every shape that manifests into our world has manifested throughout the universe and beyond into the successive dimensions. So seeing how all of that ties in together and realizing that the geometry that we can perceive, at least in this dimension or on the earth plane, is but a baseline of what actually exists. I mean, these patterns, these things get way more complex the more you evolve. and you go beyond this, and you go into the non-physical realms. So right now, I mean, Dolores Cannon said it best: Earth is a school. And to learn these foundational principles, these blueprints, is to connect to your soul directly and realize that there's much more, but we need the foundation to perceive what comes next.
Xenox, do you want to jump in on that? That brings me up to the next point that I wanted to go into. What are the main aspects that sacred geometry is expressed? And I'd say the 100% main one is through vibration and music and sound, and using, you know, the sacred geometry and very specific sound waves and geometric waves to manipulate spaces around you, or matter, or the subconscious mind, or the body, or DNA, or hence junk DNA. You know, essentially just you can use sacred geometry with vibration for any type of application in terms of healing, manifestation, really anything. And you know, the beauty of it is, you know, I wish we could see this. I personally would love to be able to see the geometric shapes all the time, every time music is played. But unfortunately, the only way to really physically see it is to grab a speaker, put a metal table on it, grab some salt, turn it up, let the table vibrate, and pour the salt on it. And you can visibly see the music, you know, your music create a geometric shape, whether it be rap, whether it be rock, you know, electronic sounds, whether it just be, you know, soft binaural beats, if that is what you get down with. You know, you can visibly see the music that you play, you know, create, you know, shapes, create, you know, a visible, you know, set of vibrations that, you know, you can put into meaning, because it's essentially, you know, going to form something, or it's just going to be a pile of muck. And that's, I'd say that's one of the scary things, is because, you know, if you get a geometric shape, if you're within your music, that's great. You know, you're doing something awesome for your mind. But if it turns to muck, then you're like, oh crap, I'm visually seeing that turn to muck. And if sacred geometry actively affects everything around me, my brain, my thoughts, my patterns, my movements, every single thing, and it's literally turning it to muck, what do I do here? You know, it makes you, it forces you to see it in your reality.
Hey, Scoop, you inadvertently blew my mind right there.
Really? Why?
So what you're speaking on, this form of tangible perception of sound waves via cymatics, it got me realizing that each of these codes, through their geometrical principles, is holding a very specific vibration that we can correlate to the message.
Yep.
So beyond the resonance of just seeing the image and feeling, there's quite literally a mathematical constant that we can promote and see. Is this a benevolent message? Is this a harmonious versus disharmonious?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're talking about with creating geometry versus creating chaos. Yeah, that just opened a whole rabbit hole for me. I'm still just thinking about that. Jesus.
No, 100%. You know, and that was one of the big things that I really thought about when I first saw, you know, the speaker table where he was doing very specific frequencies. I was thinking to myself, wow, okay, if you can do specific frequencies and tones, what about an entire song? You know, what about an entire album? What about an entire rave show? You know, if this rave show that I'm going to, that everybody's having a great time with, is it subliminally fucking with me, or is it actually, raising my vibration? Do I really know that? Am I being subliminally fucked? You won't know that until you visually perceive it, until you visually see it happen in front of you, with the vibrations and the geometric shapes forming from the song, if any at all.
I also want to add that, every time that we see physical shapes or physical outlines, like they do something to us. They activate things within us, and we as little individual particles of God have influence on reality with what we are being shown. This is one of the reasons why our government invest so much, and just in the media companies invest so much money on subliminal advertising. They'll sneak in shit that you have no idea is in front of you, and all of a sudden you're thinking a certain way, you're doing a certain thing, and one of my I guess go-tos is I always like to look at what the adversary and its followers do as a means to like see how they attempt to manipulate reality. And both, quote unquote, low frequency witches and high frequency witches all use shapes, they all use circles, they all use certain types of geometry per what it is that they're trying to do. And I think that that's seen throughout ancient history and hidden history over and over and over again. Hell, I think even Tesla used to believe in creating circular enclosures, which is, once again, like, you can look at it through a spiritual lens or you can look at it through a technological lens, but these shapes, these types of frequencies are everywhere.
And, honestly, that actually leads into a very beautiful segue. Who was the main proponent of somebody who, brought about sacred geometry in our, I wouldn't say in our lifetimes, but in the last 100 years? And I would say it would be Nikola Tesla and Walter Russell. If there were any two people that would really bring them to the forefront, it would be those two people. And, and it's the famous saying, Junks mentioned it last week, and, we should mention it this week. The keys to understanding the universe are understanding vibration, energy, and frequency. Nikola Tesla. As Xander said, he put himself in a spherical dome, but that wasn't the only thing. He spent very specific time with binaural beats. He didn't listen to music. He listened to binaural beats. He listened to very specific electronical frequencies that, he was creating with, his electronics, or not electronic, but his electric abilities. I wouldn't say it's, essentially his mind. It was more or less just his own ability to tap into that, dimension or density to be able to manipulate it the way he could. He didn't necessarily have to use his mind. He already had everything. It was just unlocked because, if you go through his papers that were released a few years ago, he came from Venus. So his soul isn't even from here. He is from a completely different world, from a completely different lineage. So,
just as you said, Xander said, Xenox said, these things do have a formula. And if you haven't read The Universal One, all of these images are within that book. So go check that out.
So yeah, this is one of the things Walter Russell was able to do. He quite literally mapped out, as this says, the analysis of the harp string. And essentially, this is a spiral of a galaxy. But it's also the spiral of fusion and the spiral of energy. Very, very fascinating how somebody, who is considered a prodigy would be able to, formulate such massive ideas in such a time where, people were just trying to figure out living in, post-industrial eras.
I think there was a quote, and I don't want to be misquoting this, but I believe Tesla told him to lock this book up when he showed him Universal One, because there was so much defamation to the truth, to sacred geometry, and to higher consciousness, especially within the early 19th century, that it's fascinating that we're in a time where crop circles are now manifesting because they're more acceptable, that maybe society, at least half polarized towards ignorance, is allowing these messages to actually pervade the collective and make it into the Great Awakening movement and allow us to keep fixed on our timeline of growth. Because if they've destroyed books, if they've destroyed history, as we know they have, it's kind of like, who else do we have to teach us? Thank God that so many people have been channeling, so many people have been accelerating and gained that mentorship on a private level. But for the planet at large, we do need some kind of guidance. And I believe crop circles to be just that, in a very neutral way. It's like the mystery maintains. It's not like everybody's seen that video that Xenox provided. So when they see a crop circle, they either think, wow, this is a great hoax, or, oh, this is crazy, I wonder how they did it. Regardless, the message is there, and the images spread. And I will say, because we didn't really get to touch on this, for more of the negative symbolism. So while I believe this technology is of the higher realms, maybe multidimensional or in nature, we're not the only ones with that tech. It seems that both sides of the spectrum have opportunities to create their own symbolism. And especially with that one that I included in the slide with you earlier. I mean, this one, it's off to the left. I know you've all seen it. It's been the most viral crop circle, I believe, ever recorded. And that's all about base resonance. How do things spread? How does virality spread? It's not a consciousness. Consciousness is very secluded. So when I saw this image for the first time, I'm not sure how everybody else feels, but not only do I see the vector craft, which is very strange, I also see the TRV. I got very evil. So basically, you're looking at the 8-spoked wheel, and that 8-spoked wheel is indicative of black magic. So what I believe we're seeing here is messages that are meant to deter or plant a bad seed, plant a seed that's going to derail or polarize others who are seemingly on the right path of growth into the latter, into self-service. And so I believe that we can get both benevolent and malevolent codes through these crop circles. Although it's very nice to see that we get more benevolent than malevolent. Malevolence is kind of doing their thing through social constructs and everything like that. But every so often you'll see one of these things and they go absolutely viral, and you have to ask yourself, why have they gone viral? How has this actually been allowed to spread as quickly than the other ones that we quite literally know are sacred geometry and are meant to teach and program us in the right way? But this is more so subliminal programming for the negative reasons.
So I also want to add on top of that crop circle on the left. Not only does it have the vector craft, it looks like the mason, the masonry symbol. It has the seeds of dark consciousness. But if you really look at it and you go past the spokes and you just look at the circle, it is straight up an eight-sided sphere, which means this is part of the eighth sphere as well, which would essentially say we're also spearheading the dark aspect of the metaverse, which is a topic that we're going to go into much later because there's still a lot of information that is being dissected, being spearheaded by the great Gigi Young and Dark Journalist. Highly, highly, highly recommend watching their videos on the eighth sphere. It is very fascinating, asks Xander. It is one of the most fascinating topics that they've talked about.
To piggyback off of what you just said, Scoobs, yeah, any iconography about the eighth sphere, for those of you who haven't really heard that term before, I myself kind of just found out about it about a few months ago. It's very interesting. It's very important, especially with the metaverse coming out, with technology taking over the way it is. A lot of us foresaw a very different world than what is actually unraveling, and they're using tech against us. I mean, it is both our saving grace and our downfall, and unfortunately these type of symbols are very, in my opinion, anything that has Masonic imagery on it, I mean, until my mind is changed, I'm always going to look at it with a cautious eye. And the symbols that are benevolent are instantly notable. What you're looking at. And so things like this, if they give you a question mark,
I also had something written down that these new crop circles look more like symbolism instead of like the old ones that were geometric, like almost like frequency sound. So I I don't know if this is just
Like these?
programming. Yeah, the new ones are just programming or just trying to tell us to wake up to these symbols. But there's a clear there's a clear difference.
100%. So we definitely tore apart sacred geometry. We could talk about it much more, but as far as a topic that is not necessarily guided,
It's really weird. Before I even jumped in, I was listening. I'll let Junk DNA explain this a little bit more. Is that even though you're singing, it goes with intent, and when you're singing, it's with your voice. And what I was uh, listening to was Junk's Ascension Dimension with Brian. It was with the opera guy. It's
Brian Breeding. Brian Breeding, yeah. No, he's not an opera. He's a pop singer, but he's very, very conscious of frequency. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was listening to that right before I came in. I'll let
Good
you
down the
explain
rabbit hole.
that, Junk.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. What was the question?
No, it was that interview you had with Ascension Dimension with the Brian or whatever, talking about music and octaves, and I mean, there's a difference between singing and then the person's intent behind it, then playing it through music and through emotions and affecting the person's feelings and emotions and intent through the music of the object you're playing. I think that's what I got from it. I was only 32 minutes into it, I think.
Oh, I don't know. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's exactly that. Just as Xenox was alluding to, is that the difference between the concert pitch of 440 and 432 is paramount. And a lot of music nowadays, especially from unconscious producers or just label heads, they're going to put that in, or maybe some of them are conscious of what that slight difference in hertz would actually do. But what I've found is that ever since I started tuning all of my music, my productions to 432, has a whole different energy, whole different vibe. It makes people feel calm and very energized, as opposed to kind of feeling a little subconscious resistance. And it's not that much, but if you think about 95% of all music that's out there is that same frequency, whether you're in your car listening to the radio or you tune into Spotify and you listen to your favorite songs, chances are you're going to run into that dissonance on a very subtle level, and then that's going to eventually kind of knock you off that equilibrium. So when I was talking to Brian, he was really specifying how that is the industry secret, that they basically can subconsciously program you with these frequencies by putting either on kind of like subtle frequencies beneath the main chorus, or quite literally speaking words and putting those in kind of sub-octave ranges where you can't actually perceive with your actual ear. All of these are very real things. So I would say that music is the tuning of the mind and body and soul. And so when you have these kind of distorted energies or distorted frequencies, chances are it's going to prevent you from maintaining a stability that you would otherwise have if you were kind of listening to healing tones, solfeggio frequencies, or just nature itself. So fascinating, but it all does kind of bake backwards into sacred geometry. And as Scoop was mentioning when we were speaking on cymatics, a pure frequency, one that's absolutely tuned to the universe, will reveal a pattern. Otherwise, it'll scatter and it won't hold its shape. And so when they portray these kind of dissonant melodies or songs, you won't necessarily see a fixed geometry. You're just going to see a mess. So
until she comes back, bringing up music, I was actually going to bring up an interesting thought that, when you go further deep down the rabbit hole, you start to hit, Luciferian stuff. And for a lot of us that are, that see through the subliminal messaging of the deep state, we understand what certain symbols look like and what kind of deities they're embracing. And I can't help but, note that Lucifer is noted as like I believe a musician, or like the I don't know, I think like the director of the musical choir in heaven, or there's definitely a link between sound and the thank you. Yeah, exactly. Like he's known as the director of sound, and he has a link to auditory power, to sound power, the illusionary power. And it's very interesting that, there are theories out there that say that we live in an illusionary world, that the 3D world is illusionary. And when we look at the micro particles of our world, it's math, it's frequency, it is sound, just in different variation. And so, it's just something that's just interesting as we tie things to the 8th sphere, as we tie things to the 3D world and the actual spiritual world. I can't help but see links between sound and the potential false light, and the fact that, in mythology, that adversary of humanity is known to be able to lie to us, to be able to fool us, to be able to have a lot of illusionary things on us. And the sound connection is very interesting, in my opinion.
Studying right now.
No worries. No worries. So we definitely delved into very, it went all over the place. But I think we very much stayed true, even though that we went on different subjects, because it all boils down into the same thing. Because at the end of the day, crop circles are teaching us sacred geometry, and sacred geometry is the basic fundamental laws of the universe. And, understanding sacred geometry basically means that you understand frequency, you understand energy, and you understand vibration all in one. So we will dedicate a full topic towards sacred geometry. We will talk a lot more about Nikola Tesla, Walter Russell, and many others that have put forward the sacred geometry ideas. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you very much for joining this very special mystery school. This is our first This is our first recorded session. So I hope you all had fun as much as I did. And I will see you next week for another very deep topic, delving even deeper as we normally do. And as always, keep on seeking New Templars.
New Templar.
New Templars.